Hello there, welcome to Unique History Channel. Today we'll be doing a reading, and the final reading, of the National Bolshevist manifesto by Karl Otto paetel. And we'll be reading from Happiness or Freedom to Can't Wait, and this will be the final reading. So let's jump in. Happiness or freedom. On the point of whether decisions should be oriented on the individual or from the collective, another of Dr. Hiller's questions will be answered. Hiller, in his work on social revolutionary nationalism, quotes the sentence, which incidentally does not originate from Ernst Jünger, like the quote before, but is a comment of my own. We stand on the side of the insurrectionary proletariat for the sake of the nation, not for the sake of a few humanitarian happiness. He then asks, these bringers of misery, these outspoken brutes, these monsters who do not hide that they are monsters, does their ideal nation require that its members be miserable? No, Dr. Hiller, no. However, in Saint-Just's speech against Danton, for example, there is a passage which shows what we mean. For the love of the fatherland is a great and terrible thing. It is without mercy, without fear, without respect for the individual when it comes to the public good. This love brought Regulus to Carthage and Marat to Pantheon. We are socialists. We support the revolution, the class struggle, and the socialization of the means of production, the nationalization of the land and soil, a state structure on the principle of self-administration. Why? Because we see these demands, which represent the political position of an enslaved proletarianized folk, a semi-colony of the foreign imperialists, the only path forward for carrying out the integration of the oppressed, disenfranchised, homeless, landless proletarians, which is necessary for the restoration of the nation's sovereignty. For the sake of the nation, for the sake of its people, socialists, that does not mean the lunatic wish to see these proletarians miserable in their new state of affairs, but indeed we do demand from the individual, as Saint-Just demands, as is done in Russia, a sacrifice of happiness and affluence for the development of the community, which through its freedom and power will again be capable of giving happiness and freedom to its members. We want to smash the economic liberalism to pieces, to free the economy for totality. The nation, as a socialist nation, liberates its members. The path towards cultural assets as well as to political rights and workers' participation in the economy in the context of the we is conceived as far as for being rather against the individual. Only we echo Saint-Just when the call sounds that the fatherland is in danger, and then these rights are handed back to the nation, everyone divesting himself of them. The nation as the biggest value. In a passage from the previously discussed article by Hiller, we remain with this topic because it's sympathetic of the dispute within the left in general. It is said that of national revolutionaries, they can come over to us from nationalism as something that needs to be overcome. Elsewhere, approvingly, he says that they don't relinquish one of the golden core of their national sentiments, something alienated to those with crippled souls. Those two quotes appear to be contradictory. In reality, they are quite related. Hiller, like Marx, respects the nation as its existence today, and is even willing to concede to the continued existence of its golden core, i.e. its cultural aspects, its language, its custom, its sense of homeland. However, exactly as Lenin so clearly said in his essays on the national question, parallel to the withering away of the state, there is to be an amalgamation of the nations into a higher unity. There is also Jouret's view, which does not exhaust the political meaning. The nation is that treasury of human genius and progress, and it would be wicked for the proletariat to smash those precious vessels of human culture. The concept of sovereignty is alien to him, as it is alien to Lenin and Stalin, in an otherwise superb analysis of the nature of the nation. But we know that there is not an innate meaning ingrained within folklore, that there, as Ernst Jünger formulates, is the magical 0 point from which politics and economy, life and form derive their order. We know that a certain value of the nation as a faithful expression, this Volkish community, does indeed abide with all material forms of manifestation, that nation building itself is also a very concrete affair. But we also know that this ultimate value has an existence in itself in which it is not worth affirming today, but it is reactionary and worth overcoming tomorrow. It is beyond the determinations of space and time, when exactly racial, geopolitical, and economic other components of the Volk emerged, but at some point, something happened amongst a group of people, and they became the historical phenomenon that is the German Volk, in Germany as likely as the result of incidents between the 6 tribes: Franconian, Swabian, Bavarian, Thurgadian, Saxon, and Friesen. Spengler has rightly determined that the peoples, Volker, are born, i.e., they can appear and perish in historical terms, but never suffer in evolution and suddenly become something else like a human race. Lagarde's expression, every Volk is a thought of God, makes it clear that this faith, in the faithful basis of Volkish existence, Volkischen Dasein, is, beyond discussion, merely a purely rational level. It is therefore a misconception on the part of Marxists when they slightly deem our political radiculation to be the sign of an evolution towards their position, that one day we shall overcome today what troublesome metaphysical childness and our thus idolatry of the nation. That belief is the very basis of our being. End of discussion. Everything else we want politically, all of our efforts on the level of the political parties to master reality within its own laws, which are on account our metaphysical reasoning, are the consequences of our own position of the faith in the laws of eternal Germanness. Because and only because we know that these real values are inalienable, are we as nationalists able to disengage ourselves from the economic and political foundations of our sociological homeland? Faith and will are not opposites, but polarities. Only where nonsense is pushed on religion at the point of political level does irrationally become absurdity. Only where one hides one's half-hearted involvement in the issues on the day behind metaphysics does arrive at Husserl and Leisberg, instead of at the proletariat and the class struggle. The ultimate value of the nation certainly seems to us a better suited with the latter than the former. Objective, but in themselves sustained comparisons demonstrate that today, the revolutionary left groups of the class-conscious proletariat, including Marxist core but non-Marxist liberal outsiders like Hitler, are following the same path as the national revolutionary movement in the anti-capitalist, anti-fascist front line. It is in the goals for tomorrow where opinions divide, the goal of a higher unity of mankind, where the idea of the state and the concept of sovereignty are called into question, is juxtaposed on one hand against the concept of a community of the nationally separate, independent, free socialist peoples on the other. A concept where the socialist nation is regarded as the nationally sovereign form of life, unable to negate the basic political principles, the friend-enemy principle, which as a consequence makes the friction of eternal peace appear today totally impossible. A concept wherein the socialist state and individual expectations of happiness are considered upon national and state demands, where the universal, self-consuming nature of the German nation-building will be tamed through the polarity of the Prussian principles of militant state life. To be Prussian is to be a matter of will, not of birth certificates. Whereas the nationalism cell of the Volk, the family, the base of the state, provides the bund of men who will make history. We cannot accept what Engels wrote to Bebel in the 1875 program letter. Now, since the state is merely a traditional institution of use is made in the struggle in the revolution to keep down one's enemies by force, it is utter nonsense to speak of a free people's state so as long as the proletariat still makes use of the state. It makes use of it not for the purpose of freedom, but for suppression of its enemies, and soon as there could be any discussion of freedom, the state such ceases to exist. Marxism and the National Question. That Lenin, in any event, saw this as a future goal is inarguable. He expressed it clearly and unambiguously. It is with pride that we can say at the first Congress we are, in fact, merely propagandists. We are only proclaiming our fundamental ideas among the world's proletariat. We only issue the call to fight where we are merely asking where the people who are capable of taking this path. Now, the advanced proletariat is everywhere. Everywhere there is, often poorly organized, a proletarian army, And if our international comrades will help us now to organize a united army, the task is the world proletariat revolution and the creation of a world Soviet Republic. Trotsky, too, in his pamphlet Against National Communism, clearly puts forward the slogan of United Soviet States of Europe. Or as Lenin put it, the socialist movement cannot triumph within the old national framework. It creates new, higher forms of human coexistence in which the legitimate needs and the progressive aspirations of the working masses of each nationality for the first time be satisfied through international unity, providing existing national partitions are eliminated. Lenin further says, in the age of imperialism, there can be no other salvation for the majority of the world's nations than through great revolutionary actions undertaken by the proletariat of the great powers, spreading beyond the bounds of nationality, smashing those boundaries, and overthrowing the international bourgeoisie. If this overthrow does not occur, the great powers will continue to exist. Also, the oppression of 9/10 of the nation of the world will remain, but if the bourgeoisie's fall does occur, it enormously accelerates the downfall of each and every national partition. In the sessions of the 16th Congress, which was in June or July of 1930, Stalin expressed himself unequivocally on the issue of the future of national languages. But as far as the future prospects of national cultures and national languages are concerned, I have always been and will always remain of Leninist opinion that at the time of socialism's victory on a worldwide scale where socialism will infuse and strengthen the way of life, national language will merge into one common tongue, although this tongue will neither be Great Russian nor German, but something new. In a contrast, a line of dialectical idealism can be drawn from Fichte through Hegel to von Rijk. The relationship of the individual to the spirit of the people, Volksgeist, is that he appropriates his substantial existence, that this becomes his character and ability, that he may be something, for he finds the being of his own folk as a wide, established, firm world before him, with which he has to incorporate himself. The march of God in the world is that of the state is its reason for power, actualized by will. In considering the idea of state, we must not have our eyes on particular states nor particular institutions. Instead, one must consider the idea actual by God itself. And Leopold von Ranke states that all states in the world that count for something are suffused with their own special tendencies. It would be ridiculous to interrupt them as little more than protection agencies for individuals who band together to protect their private property, for example. On the contrary, those tendencies are of a spiritual nature, and the character of all their fellow citizens is thereby determined and definitely imprinted upon them. Müller von den Bruck refers to this avowal in the Eternal Reich. Every folk embodies a special thought that belongs to it, just as itself is an indivisible whole being of itself. It is born with this thought. With this thought, it breaks away from the bosom of race and earth and hurls itself into historical pace. But Lenin clearly says the opposite in his articles on the National Question. Marxism is irreconcilable with nationalism, be it even the fairest, purest, most civilized brand of nationalism. Marxism substitutes internationalism in place of forms of nationalism, the amalgamations of nations into a higher unity, a unity that is growing before our eyes in every mile of railway line built, with every international trust, with every workers' association, an association as international in its economic activities as well as in their ideas and aspirations. The proletariat cannot support any consolidation of nationalism. On the contrary, it supports everything, hastens the abolitions of national differences, the removal of national barriers, and everything that makes the ties between nationalities closer and closer, everything that leads to merging of nations. Against these hypotheses, which, as predictions are, of course, based on faith rather than knowledge, we position another. Assume that the Marxist thesis to be correct, that being determined consciously, we are of the belief that a new socialist being will also shape the new consciousness, insofar that the sense of attachment of the values to the homeland, soil, and folk, absent from the capitalist being, will restore itself, and of itself restore a strengthening of the national character, but the drive towards assimilation, towards a withering away, will never arise. On the contrary, the outcome will instead be an ever-growing awareness of national distinctness, an ever-growing involvement in the German historical tradition, an ever-growing consciousness of one of the once formative principles. Example, the will to live as a sovereign socialist nation. It is, however, but a simple dialecticism of Otto Strasser's, not much approved by its backwards-looking pathos when he reduces the debate with Marxism in his excitable disputations with down to set formula. We and you want socialism, but the path is different. You want it on an international basis, we want it on a national one. The first is impossible because of every country's different economic maturity and because experience shows that the common turn has achieved nothing. Strasser, if he were to read Marxist writings, would find that the sentiment far better expressed in them, such as the program of the Sixth World Congress of the Communist International. Unequal economic and political development is in the absolute law of capitalism. It is exacerbated even more acutely in the epoch of imperialism. Hence it follows the international proletarian revolution cannot be conceived as a single event occurring simultaneously worldwide. At first, socialism may be victorious in a few, and even a single country alone. But every such proletarian victory broadens the basis of the world revolution and consequently furthers the intensifying general crisis of capitalism. The capitalist system in this way approaches its final collapse. The dictatorship of the finance capital breaks apart. The second of Strasser's claims is not proven at all, insists the Russian Revolution being based, for example, on the here or there denied international way. So there is no split between the fronts at all. There is nothing contradictory in the way that nationalist socialism can be quite international, working together, while all those other forces seeking to take down the same adversary. The final goal, however, is achieved by separation. That Marxism rejects the socialist nation proclaimed by Lenin. The idea of a jurisdictional separations of nations from one another is a reactionary idea. This is the same goal, whether by the different nature of the current practice of Russia's nationality policy is by no means misunderstood as Trotsky describes. Marxism takes on a point of departure from the world economy, not as the sum of national parts as the mighty independent reality created by the international division of labor and the world market, in which the present epoch holds sway over the national markets. The productive forces of capitalist society have long outgrown national powers. The imperialist war was an expression of that. Compared to the capitalist society, social society must represent a higher stage of respect to technique of production. To aim at building a nationally isolated social society means, in spite of all passing success, to pull back the forces of production, even compared with capitalism. Attempting to realize the independent geographical, cultural, and historical conditions of the country's development, which institutes a part of the world unity, a self-contained proportionality of all branches of the economy within a national framework, means pursuing a reactionary utopia. But national communism before Marx, incidentally, a man in the French Revolution, had already put forward entirely communist demands for the sake of nation. Fouché, in Lyon's instructions, knows that with a goal as Fata Morgana is placed for the German people, knows that it can only mean communism, yes, but as a duty of German duty of order within the boundaries of the nation. This is what calls us, not the world economy. Rural revolution? The new nationalism born in the hearts of those who no longer have any connection to the bourgeois lifestyle, out of clear recognition that no political dynamism can be expected from it. It is beginning today to turn into a hopeful gaze over the forces of the revolution towards the land vote movement. That there are still, from there, where the strength and substance of the German people are still rooted, tomorrow shall be built. And a romanticism begins to unfold in which, nourished by the myth of the black flags, nourished by the legendary myth of the name Klausheim, disdainfully turns itself away from the uprooted metropolitan masses, disdainfully turns itself away from the Materialistic slogans of the proletariat believing in a new rebirth of folkish life from soil and reckoning, but it can dispense with the worker, the city, and asphalt. But the perspective completely overlooks that the driving forces behind the will to resist, especially in the case of the peasantry and the landfolk's every attempt at self-help, are actually in the end deprived solely of the personal plight of the individuals in question. There, where peace is driven from the farmland, the lease collected under the compulsion, the farmer reaches for the scythe and drubs of the yard. There, where the Jew fleeces the individual, folkish self-assertiveness awakens. It is a large part of the same misery that also unites the proletarian under revolutionary banners. His will, too, that things should be different, better, cannot be separated from the misery that preys on his minds. But there is something more in which the peasant's resistance, whoever it is organized, is still missing today, but which the left has left the worker, a 50-year workers' movement in his blood, the sense of a mission when the Internationale begins to sound amidst the march of the metropolitan columns. Then the hard-ridden prole feels within himself the burning desire that he may someday face a far better, the dogged certainty that he himself is the bearer of a historical trend, a member of a history-shaping force. The peasant, however, is still today revolutionary only of hardship, not out of sense of mission. The battle against the revolution, therefore, will be made with the metropolis, but certainly never against the peasants. A white ring of the country under fascist flags would be the starvation of the revolutionized city. The object, therefore, is to procure the peasants as a second wave of revolution, also, of course, to interest them economically. The Peasant Question in Germany. National communism cannot consider preaching a reformed National Socialism, but nor can it consider itself preaching a reformed Marxism. The suggestions that nationalism offers on the subject of the Peasant Question are only in regards to the necessity of not destroying the eternal category of the soil-bound peasant. Never can they undermine socialist economic planning. But Dr. Reichstadt is right when he states that the German peasant thinks not all voluntarily relinquishing his self-sufficient economy. His ideal, not like the proletarian self-abolition, is a socialist stratum. On the contrary, he is autonomy at a price. The advantages that communism promises hold no selling power over his desire to work independently on his own soil. The communists like to refer to Russia. There are the peasants followed Bolshevism, so why not also one day Germany? To answer, I may be permitted to point the following differences. 1. In Russia, the peasantry has been won by an enormous gift of land. In Germany, this gift can only turn out poorly. 2. In Russia, the peasantry did not know, in contrast to today's Germans, this gift was only in a provisional nature. 3. Russia under communism remains, in contrast to Germany, agriculturally self-sufficient. Its farming is such not endangered. But the peasant is not, in any case, doomed to be merged into large-scale enterprises because they are technically superior. The peasantry is capable of agreeing to a socialist order which fulfills the total elimination of the capitalist class rule without necessarily having to sacrifice itself. It can help establish a socialism in which the means of production and all capitalists and large landowners, in addition to the entire transportation, finance, banking, and wholesale sectors, are socialized. Foreign trade is monopolized, and voluntarily state-subsidized cooperatives flourished in the non-capitalist economic center. The German peasantry is furthermore well on its way to overcoming liberal conception of poverty, and to comprehending its right of possession to the soil as the mandate of the nation. It is entitled furthermore to exercise these rights of possession, turning them towards the fulfillment of large-scale tasks. Here an independent and development occurs in a peasantry, a progression towards a communal economic mode of thought, which unfortunately, because it retains the form of individual economy, is misunderstood by Marxism as a reactionary and feudalist. In order in which exhibits above-mentioned characteristics may justifiably, without the distortion and unfortunately so common today, be described as socialist, it means not only breaking of the capitalist rule and the eradications of the contradictions being oppressive and oppressed class, but also the rule, the ideals of the plan and community, because the working nation holds every commanding height at the economy firmly under its control. Thus is the small peasant farmed, maintained within the framework of the planned economy, cooperatively bound, with second and third farmers' sons, farm laborers, and settlement craving city dwellers on the expropriated estates of the big landowners, and the demand German form of farming enterprise and socialism. Council state or corporate state. The basic demand for economy in a national revolutionary socialism can only be all power in the hands of the nation. So too is there the parallel concrete demand for the state structure. The state is the sovereign nation, is the legislative and executive organs are the mandates of the Volk, which means in consequences the council state. The principle of self-government expressed within is no way racially foreign or typically Russian, rather it's the old Germanic democracy. Even the German national politician Martin Spann says about it, the council idea strives to bring spirit and active living back to our Volkish existence once more. It is concisely a construct from below. Those who live together, who work together, all who know one another have common horizons, should lay the foundation of its administration, and only those involved in laying these foundations should afterwards help build the floors and finally may assist in placing the copestone. This is what Baron von Stein intended. Through this, he promised the beneficial outcome of the Volk's participation in state. Elections to the council assemblies which take place in a direct form, staggered from the local council up the Greater German Council Congress, breaking up the parties from the administration, agencies authorized to executive. This will alone provides a true reflection of the people's will, irrespective of distinctions of economic interests. All working people are eligible to vote. The foundation for the working district, the enterprises, while the free middle classes is residential district. The plural voting system which prevails in Russia is the detriment of the peasants and is therefore unfeasible. The council formations establish special committees, peasant chambers, workers' chambers, on an occupational basis. All elected delegates in them, the council parliaments, the executive bodies are recallable at any time, are each at time accountable to form the responsible for their mandate and have an income which is no higher than that of their previous profession. In primary elections, the village councils, city councils, and district councils are elected. This process is run by administration agencies. The next highest council assembly is not elected by the primary electorate, but comprises the delegates of the respective lower council parliaments in each Gaul, which, on the basis of tribal classification, will replace the current dynastic states. The highest formation is the Greater German Council Congress, which fulfills legislative functions and commissions to the government. The Council Constitution, which, though its Greater German foundation involves every working German in the fate of the nation, is to be straightforward and logical without any literary flourishes. As for the bureaucracy being wound up at all, it will be liquidated. The civil servant type perishes. The economic interests with hetero who have been fighting one another in the guise of ideological parties will be eliminated from the state body. The organizational apparatus of the parties shattered. An entirely new social body thus arises in which finally a real volonté générale represents the unity of the nation, sprouting from life and its bearers in the generational line of the people, not falsified through party and caste, but tied to the state. Councils in the sense demonstrated here have already been formed in Cromwell's armed formations. Lenin's model was above all the Paris Commune and the Gestapo Londere rightly pointed to the old Germanic thing as an inspiration. Today, however, it has become more fashionable among many national groups to prefer the corporate state as a successor to the morbid parliamentarism. For that reason, a universalist worldview of distinctly Catholic characteristics, by the by, has been crafted by Ottoman Span, yet, just as little as his revolutionary biological Epigones understands the fact of the organic inherited estate of the Middle Ages cannot be replaced today by occupation, he was able to conjure away or cover up the anti-state thinking contained therein. The corporate state, in being established on the occupations, thus on earning interest of its elected representatives, signifies the only perpetuation of interest groups. Upon the transformation of the state's outward form, a new opportunity for making the economy the fate of the Volkish life. It is conceivable that for some estates answers may be found, but it is also certain that no foreign state policy can be advanced, even its introduction and its functioning, that above all share the public responsibility for the nation, will be smothered in a tangled mass of corporate organizations. A state, here is, in essence, only a manufacturing company. From here, too, the problem of leadership acquires no new meaning. Socialism and council structure, however, do not want to negate nor destroy leadership, merely integrate it into a service for the whole. Who will lead whoever works the most for the community and who works best for them? The possible starting point in the competition for proof of worth and commitment must always be the same. The result will always be different. Corresponding to the aptitude and the achievement, there will be leaders led in the future too, but in this designation will provide them with law of life and qualification, not an arbitrary separation by caste. Even the question of the Nordic leadership substance can only be decided like so, through the performance of the struggle of the entire Volk. If Nordic blood is indeed to be the creative, state-building, heroic element of the Germanic Volk, then the revolution undoubtedly clears the way to prove its leadership capabilities for itself. Socialism. We are socialists. That means, at the moment of revolution, we demand nationalization of the land and soil, distributization of large estates. All land ownership in the future will be mandate of the nation. Transfer of all the large-scale and medium-scale enterprises of industry, banking, department stores, mineral resources, mining, and transportation to the hands of the Volk. State plan economy without a monopoly of foreign trade. 4. Weapons in the hands of the whole, the establishment of the people's militia. Any doctrines of profit sharing and private management which guarantee even the partially private ownership of the means of production and the commodity character of land are semi-fascist diversionary maneuvers. A planned economy, like that demanded by Werner Sombart in his Future of Capitalism, which emphasizes private property and the social property, private economy, and social economy, is one of the many half measures desired today. For all the intents and purposes, the only one last resort included by the top people. This includes primarily Strasser's German socialism, but also the Postdium of the Revolve. The fundamental law of the true national socialism remains the economy in the hands of the nation. This law applies as much to the industrial enterprise as the question of property. But above all, however, it does serve as a justification for autocracy and the monopoly over foreign trade. Prussia as a principle. There is one thing socialism cannot ignore: the reality of Prussia. There indeed both Oswald Spengler and Mulder von den Broek identified with the Prussian style as the type of state socialism which we have demanded arise within German territories. It already exists in them in an embryonic form. There has the choice that we over I, in the unity of proletariat, already manifested itself in contrast to the Marxist conception of society. A creative self-existence grounded in blood and steel experience as a demand, not as some special opportunity. Of course, one must keep in mind that there is another side to these things. No coincidence the synthesis become Prussianism and socialism. Examples: Spengler's glorification of the human carnivore Even the Prussian principle is today endangered of being misused. Only in Prussia is it historically capable, seeing itself always as the correlation of the internal German, and only Prussia, which incorporates the old Junker tradition, meets the demands of the Baron von Stein to involve the Volk in the responsibility of the state. Never, however, should the variation of that old Prussianism, which is popular in some circles, such as we see reflected in the writings of A. Ludwig von der Maritz, with their unbelievable invective towards the youth leagues and their contempt for the liberation of the peasants, for self-government, and even for the Jacobins of 1813, will be answered with anything other than declaration of war. Not such transitory of Prussian statehood, unconditional antagonists from a period of upheaval, but instead the plea to be a servant of the state as lived and embodied by Frederick II. That is a formative power that cannot be renounced, and which is a form of basis of state powers. Indeed, Russia has well taken note. That Prussia of which the knightly orders dreamed when they erected the massive battlements of Marienburg, and one be clear about this too, is another source of will, and one that is unacceptable if one is not ready to accept the foundation of faith behind the vows, which helps shape the people, nature, and the history of the Teutonic Knights and determine the direction of will, Christianity. The unifying rationale for today's heathen idea of the state is not to be drawn from Hermann von Salza, nor from Ludwig von der Maritz, only from the Potsdam of Frederick the Great. One can make a leap over to the philosophers of Hegel's total state and his Marxist inversion to the socialist state of tomorrow. For this nationalism is unchristian, and then now the personal fate of the Prussian officer Trank shows what it's all about. Personally plunged by the king into the most painful depths, this former favorite of the king, beloved sister of the king's sister, after 9 years of the inhumane suffering and casemates of Mandenburg, decided at the end of a ruined existence in his life to confess to the spirit of Friedrich the Unique. This clearly interested in Prussia, no oath is subjected to recall. Only in this ethos, when uniquely and irrevocably is able to bind the Germans of tomorrow to the socialist nation, and Germany will live therefore forever. Prussia must be, Prussia as an attitude, Prussia as a principle, Prussia as a reality, spiritual reality, as Moller von Brook put it. Germany cannot do without Prussia, because it cannot do without Prussianism. Prussianism, that is, the will of the state and the recognition of historical life, is a political life in which we must accept as political people. It goes without saying, of course, that this is not about the country of Prussia, in which will have to be subordinated to the organic, decentralized unity concept throughout the council structure of the tribal regions. The ancestral heartland of Prussia did not establish a biologically distinct but historically existent new tribal concept. But Prussia's impulsive will one day can also be said about Germany's Prussianization. Socialism will transform German citizens into appendages of the German state, and the contradictions between nation, Volk, and state will be abolished by it and refashioned into a new synthesis. It is obvious that the old medieval imperial idea, Reichsstaat, of supranational Christian ruler, which the German emperor still embodies à l'Entente, has nothing to do with this and its end goal, the pacification of the world. But this servant period of imperium has faded away into relevance. Socialist Germany is of a different essence, and yet it represents all Germans the same. The class struggle as a nationalist demand. The class struggle is not an invention of the Jew Marx. It is a fact of daily life, reflecting the labor contract between employer and employee, as well as the functions of suppressed state and cultural life. It is a battle line established by those who are in possession of the economic powers imposed on those below, who respond with fury. It does not require a moral judgment, but instead a stated decision on which side we want to fight. The class struggle is not some artificial construct. As everywhere in the lives of cells, new life replaces the old and feeble, and so too is in the body of the Volk, as in the old leadership class, after fulfilling its function for the community over a certain period, replaced by new forces, usually with violence. Thus is the class struggle, irrespective of the fact that this process is playing itself out amongst all peoples, a course of events in the life of the Volk, a process of reversal against the leadership with a Volk organism. Just as every previous revolution and its sociological bearer, the clearest example being the bourgeois French Revolution, so too does the revolution which we are situated. The working class, which is today pounding at the gates of German history, will have to battle out the class struggle within the current holders of the economic resources and the instruments of power, so they can be both transferred into the workers' hands at the moment of revolution, thus being ready to declare itself a nation and replace the old leadership. The class struggle is quite certainly grounded in nationalism, and to make use of a word too often misused by charlatans, absolutely organically, as Ernst Karl Otto puts it. The nation appears to be a universal collection of divisions that are characterized through their discordant stratification. One of its most significant structural principles is that of horizontally tiered layers, whose higher counts are distinguished by attributes not considered to be lowly: tax exemption for the clergy, university education for the bourgeois, privilege to political politics for nobility, and economic access for the capitalists. Each of these national strata develop its own special societal customs and mores. Yes, they even form their own separate realm of life. Proletarians marry only proletarians, and nobles marry only nobles. But the entirety of these strata only latently belong to the nation. It is a historical law that at any time the nation is represented by only one specific group, every action by this group of all which is to serve its only own interests and are suddenly placed in a different light, and maintain the most crucial significance for the entire nation. The ratio of stratification as it presents itself at any time today, for example, was always based originally on the value and power relationship underlying the stratification of the structure. The group that is in power once incarcerated the essence of the nation, it earns position. Through the biological process, however, the ruling strata always loses its vitality and authority to represent the nation more quickly than it does its privileges, while at the same time drawing up new strata from below to fulfill by itself the destiny of the nation. The ruling strata has returned to dormancy. It has become the wood and trunk of the nation. In other words, to go down in history, while new cells are formed that assume the function of life-giving rings. The lower stratum, on principle, demonstrate its strength by finding itself alone something which it is dependent on in most instances. Its fight against the old stratum, which refuses to give up the armchairs of power, is a class struggle in the true sense of them. It embraces all areas of Volkish life, cultural and economic. Our present ascendant class, into whose lies the destiny of the nation, not only has ever resents the obstacles to come, acquiring education, entering into good society, but is hindered by a certain objective barriers imposed over its young life, capitalism. This sets against every best intention an insurmountable obstacle. This class must be therefore given at least a chance to prove itself, regardless of what it proves useful or not. This should go unsaid, that this can only be achieved through the elimination of capitalism. Only a new economic system can provide the guarantee for Volkish life. That is to say, the struggle of the proletariat for those things that are an all-encompassing culture and economy is in its modus purely an economic one, which is not to say that the productive economy from itself gives birth to new culture. No, it only sets free the forces for its potential development. But since capitalism, which against the fight for the proletarian class is directed first and foremost, is superbly held by the sinking bourgeoisie class, and so is every struggle against the bourgeoisie, against their morality, art, and ethics, a struggle against capitalism, and at the same time a struggle for the proletariat, which is, again, not to say that capitalism necessarily conditioned or created this morality, art, religion, or ethics. Through this version of concept and class struggle, it is not feasible to see any other outcome than the proletariat subsequent to its own time and economic system. It is superseded by something new in the struggle If it is possible to completely eliminate class divisions and bring about new strata which no longer have a class character, then it will be within these social bodies that the class struggle continues, in which nothing about the struggle of ascending and descending life, a cycle that will never stop, except when the world finally stops. The justification by which every semi-fascist rejects the class struggle is a simple conjuring trick. The class struggle is the reality of capitalism, and the Volksgemeinschaft the reality of socialism. To operate under this statement is nothing more than an intellectual dishonesty. For precisely because socialism is supposed to become a reality and that the Volksgemeinschaft can only be preached as a goal, never as a whitewashing prevailing capitalist world as it exists today. To conclude we are socialists, hence against the class struggle, is simply illogical, because one cannot abruptly assign a citation of tomorrow to today, cannot employ a goal to negate what is existent. Even the opposing slogan of 97% used by the Tedder Circle and the Black Front is fictional. Even provided that Freud's wealth and income stats are correct, these 97 do not present the shared consciousness. The fight is led by those who want it, of statistically disinherited as the politics of the day hourly prove. A large part of the 97% defends the 3%, and the 97% is the fantasy. The class struggle is a fact. There are also comments made by the Archive for Politics and History as early as March 1925. The fundamental reality of today's European social order is that the rift polarization from socialist doctrines emanates no longer passes through the nation's bourgeois society, but instead runs through world society, through the nations of Europe. Indeed, it splits the world down the middle. The proletarian primal existence of bondage and slavery is in today's Germany the national social experience, or at least it should be. Today there is no longer simply a politically free, economically and socially unfree, exploited proletarian class alongside its internal opposition class to the exploited privileged property owners, or rather this inanity, which is relative to the world historical polarization process of we have been witnesses and victims, i.e. the secondary accounting on the ranked order of historical values. Instead, there are now proletarianized, non-proletarianized, and in the midst of this Europe, which is in its course had a long history, never knew this in kind of antagonism, and at any rate would not stand for the long run. The momentous world historical document which has established or legalized new status for Europe as the Versailles Peace Treaty, it is therefore essential to finally raise this new condition into the clarity of the consciousness so it can be made to the basis of experience which determines our whole outlook upon the world. Versailles. The enemy of revolutionary nationalism remains Versailles. There is a little we have to say therefore, but always remember that the broader, bolder the weight upon Germany's freedom, the path to nationalism, the path to socialism, the path to revolution, leads only to the tearing up of all the treaties and pacts from Versailles to Young. Anyone betrays this realization by sniveling for revisionism, betrays the German future, betrays the socialist nation of tomorrow. The path to the sovereign German nation leads only through the restoration of Greater Germany, i.e. solely and exclusively through the ruins of the system of Versailles. The Frenchman Jaurès shows us the right response. The fatherland is not an idea that has outlived its usefulness. For the concept of fatherland evolves and deepens itself. I have always been more convinced that the proletarian in its innermost cannot accept any doctrine of national reunification, of national servitism, to revolt against the despotism of kings, against the tyranny of the ruling class. Yet let the yoke of conquest and the rule of foreign militarism be imposed without any resistance as a childly, pathetic contradiction. At the first alarming invasion, all forces of instinct reason would be swept away for it to make sense. That the proletarians who are not liberated from capital by the conqueror should consent furthermore to be a tributarism austerity. The reality, however, it is, whenever there is a fatherland, that is, historical group that is conscious of its unity and continuing, then the attack on freedom and independence of this fatherland is an assimilation against civilization and relapse into barbarism. Revolutionary foreign policy. The revolutionary nationalist conception of foreign policy is therefore clear. A front against Versailles, which means a front against the West and its eastern, southern, southeastern satellites, which involves taking up the old slogan of Braucht auf Ranzu against capitalism and imperialism, a slogan for which the words of Moltke cannot hold true. It is hard to be a patriot in Germany, for one is forgotten, yet he is nonetheless the way for every insurrectionary will. It means forming a fighting community with the adversity of Versailles world, Russia, the only league with the Russia, which as the first socialist world power will be a national alliance for socialist Germany, and can the German Eastern question be resolved, on which same time will determine the existence of Poland. The same front includes all the oppressed peoples of the earth. In place of a colonial policy, there will be the League of Oppressed Nations will be brought under German leadership. These are the political front lines, while the NSDAP is in racial sympathy with England, full of resentment and romanticism. Its anti-Russia policy, a capitalist mercenary attitude, its exclusive Italian agenda suggests a dogmatic obsession. So exist the fronts in the world today, created by the class struggle of nations. The foreign policy of the Volk is invariably conditioned to part of that of the struggle, which never doctrine, but is always a question of expediency. Therefore, this policy cannot be made by Germany of Hindenburg or Hitler, but ultimately arise from a revolutionary Germany. The New Faith. Brüning, rightly described as the greatest German chancellor since Bismarck, governed not only by virtue of the bureaucratic and organizational leverage of the state he represented, but not only by the fight, because finance capital bestows all its support upon him as a solid advocate against social revolution. The Roman Chancellor of the German nation was the master of Germany because he is one of the few men of our day who lives from faith, who acts from faith, and who is supported by a spiritual reality, faith in eternal Rome, a faith that can always and can only be overcome by the new faith, never through negation, never through skepticism. Eternal Rome will only disappear from the German regions when faith in eternal Germany replaces it. Rome, with all of its Western Christianity, can, with the ultimately tranquil face of the treatise pseudo-enlightenment of the free-thinking circles, with the tasteless intensity directed against the priesthood. By the virtue of its faith, it will be able to master the more anti-tendencies. Yet, with all the sanguine unrest today, Rome is already confronted with the beginnings of a new faith, the approach of the German Renaissance. And from here, undesirable if, for example, the work of Rudolf Panwitz or Stefan George is branded dangerous by Christian intellectual circles, which Ludwig Killiges bitterly fought against. If on the edge of today's politics, still unfinished attempts of the circles around Ludendorff to work on a new German faith are answered with hate and scornful vilification. Here, where the outline of the new paganism shines forth, a cosmic religiosity centered in blood, soul, and race, rooted in the divine breath of the worldly view. Here do not axe the blows of the fall, the edicts of the Oriental faith, which overshadows the people. And if German nationalism has a deep spiritual and religious sense, that is, Rosenberg recognized, but then recanted under the pressure of his Catholic master, of an insurrection of the Germanic way of life, suppressed by the days of Charlemagne, the Saxon slayer, and against the foreign infiltration of Christianity, the new paganism, the renaissance of a German faith, will be living justification the power of German revolution. Only if one succeeds in calling the gods back home will the mission of unity, form, and faith and blood be set into motion. There is still little to declare today in regards to its actual content, but one thing must be made clear in the period where Wilhelm's staple Christianization of politics is ever more inherently placed in the theology of new nationalism, which Hans Bellaire's sharp pen is regrettably more noticeably puts in service of Christian regeneration. Politics established its own laws within German faith once more. Ethics have none of their own, but in that era, nor do they have any business in having. It is worth repeating, the German transformation in which we are in the midst of today is influential in all areas. It shapes our century politically, economically, and culturally. Transforms the individual that his spiritual structure and his transform the attitude around his surroundings. This German revolution, thus itself a great totality, encompassing the whole of life and asserting itself in life's every aspect, in its justification, is not only the religious level, a struggle against passionless, corrupted, distorted church, but also an uncompromising struggle against the essential essence of Christianity, which is core is alien, disastrous to the German nature. We have to grasp Ludendorff's merciless observation. Christianity is a poison by which peoples perish, as we begin to recognize the political tendency of the main line as the most dangerous adversary. Often a fatal misconception becomes active within the resolution of religious problems, unsatisfactory, blending them together with a political task. The rebirth of religious life of our time and the fulfillment of the German political mission are two things that demand a clean and honest separation. And he who is primarily to do one has no business applying valuations of the test to the field of the other. Who understands both may draw strength in that, but may not distort the borderlines between them. Here a clean division is required. Also, self-restraint and awe. From today's strife, we seek to mold the German rank of tomorrow in all fields of human activity. This is our task. Its guarantee is socialism. Its promise is Gestalt is the political unity of a free nation. Its path is the struggle for power, revolution. On this path, the slogan has the coming perish of those who are in eternal awe of the eternal has no place. God's kingdom and realm of gods both demand service and readiness. His kingdom is not of this world, however, it is not greater than the holy kingdom of earth, merely another. Your faith in God must not break from your service to the gods as you enter through God into the kingdom of which is not this world, and you need the gods still, so that the kingdom of earth does not perish. And you know what it means to be a guest of two kingdoms, a wanderer between both worlds, to have a share in the graces of each, graces of which both act as connections of the forces of life. It is precisely this that must be recognized by those who partake in the grace of order, and they only will ultimately bear the responsibility for their decision. It is their personal tragedy to witness the impossibility of crossing between the two. Woe to they if they are the guests of both kingdoms, between two worlds, fearlessly seek to infringe the borderlines between them if they want to replace the political and social values of communal freedom, to replace with the political will to power with Christian ranting about the Sermon of the Mount, if they adulterate the slogan everything for Germany with the addendum Germany for Christ. The religion transformation of revolt in the entire Western world goes side by side with this political restructuring, the priestly people responsible for the first, the heroic for the second. Both are a task set before man for our type. Each man must feel the call, that which calls him above all else, and those who have a sense of both should not lose sight of the autonomy of both of these processes. Otherwise they will end by betraying as one. As Max Weber says, his is the practical conclusion of which demonstrates the realization for everyday life. All ethnically oriented action can be classed under two different maxims. It can be an ethic of ultimate ends, an ethic of responsibility, that is, it can be dictated by the kingdom of God or by the kingdom of this world. The absolute ethic of the religious man does not question the harmful consequences of an action. It has to be done with one's own party. For the politician, however, the principle holds true: thou shalt resist evil by force, or you will be responsible for the evil winning out. Also, the early Christians knew full well that the world was ruled by demons, and that he who engages in politics, that is, with power and violence as a means, enters the pact with diabolic powers. And for that, his actions is not good, can only come from the good, and the only evil from evil, but often the opposite. Anyone who does not see this political infant is indeed a political infant. Nationalism demands political action. The watchword is Germany, only Germany. For this goal, we are prepared to give up everything, yes, everything, even our own clean slate, even religiously our own salvation, prepared to become guilty for the sake of the goal. And only those who are ready for this self-sacrifice, only they may be involved in politics because only they are allowed to make demands. The priest, however, responsible for building the future faith, must himself remain pure. Both are divinely ordained. He who has a person religiously must be aware of this divide to try and resolve it within his own life. But once again, do not blur the boundaries when acting. Everyone must serve those two masters because he is a human, and when he leaves one, he receives a thorn in the flesh. Only then are we able to reshape Germany's politics, and that is the situation today. One will come when the hour is ripe and will be mercy. The other, however, is duty. We will never accept Christianity's claim to absolute right, in which it must be the nature of an extent as the Catholic Hochland demonstrates. Thus, against the national idea as only the possible answer, the first priority is the preservation of the Christian religion and the intimate communion of all Christians. Only afterwards comes the preservation of the individual nationalities, meaning that relatively valuable things of lesser worth have given way to endanger the unparalleled value of Christianity. It must always be kept in mind, however, that while it may not risk the task of Christianity to preserve nationality, the influence of Christianity will always be to support the valuable assets of the nation. What is true of the national also applies to cultures. They are not autonomous factors separate from, independent of Christianity, but a subordinate, independent whole subsumed in the Christian idea overall. Here there can be no bridge, only more applies. The order of the nation. Whoever fights today for nationhood through the socialist revolution cannot, on the grounds, have this been set out the aim destruction of the Marxist mass party, nor the settlement with Marxism from the outside. He can probably live well the Volkish reality permeates the Revolutionary Act as opposed to false or half-true doctrines, which Russia shows to be a concrete possibility. You'll have to leave that judgment, however, up to life and its laws. Revolutionary Marxism is already marching for the revolution in socialism today. The new order, which emerges from the swell of upheaval, will be, in our opinions, not the universal humanity anticipated by its theorists, but the community of sovereign states. Not the past, but the signpost is wrong. The forces over on the other side engaged under red swastika flags in a 10-year struggle for freedom and bread with all the fervor of their hearts, with the glowing faith, likewise stand in the military camp of the German Revolution. They must be unfastened from their fascist and semi-fascist straitjackets, involving them alongside marching in red battalions in decisive battle for a socialist Germany remains the task of national communism. It will have to prove itself today. That will never, however, include those masses who today follow the drummer from Brno, only accept the salvation of the petty bourgeoisie existence. A few, instead, will be the indispensable, the socialists, the activists, and the proletariatized folk whom the class struggle of the nation never returns to the private sphere. They will be the fighters sought from the Hitler front. It is all about them, to fashion them as the order of the nation inextricably sworn to the watchword of eternal Germany, belonging only to it. Involuntary allegiance with the red flag, with hammer and scythe, and the sword committed to the political front of the workers and peasants and soldiers as the crack troops of the national revolt in Germany. That is what needs to be tackled. The duty of revolutionary nationalism to be proven in definitely detailed work. A mass-based and parallel to NSDAP is for such a task naturally impossible. One of the preconditions, however, which national communism is able to resolve the unification of the national and revolutionary groups it represents. And therefore we demand from the German public that the groups, leaders, and circles in today's Germany who ideologically and particularly occupy fighting positions sketched out here in this broad line put aside personalization and reservations and instead work out the nuisances of these described here and take steps towards political cooperation. We call for Werner Last, the Confederates, Uhl Polven in the Young Prussian League, Ernst Nikolisch in the Widerstand Circle, Rolf Koenig in Jugendkampfverein, G. Schild in the German Socialist Combat Movement. We call for the Kommandant in the circle around Friedrich Kaiser and his Reich. We call for the Grabskurs and the Gegener to take in hand with us all the groups and individuals who fundamentally share this position, their preparations for a unified national communist movement, aloof from sympathy or antipathy of leaders, aloof from organization egoism of all kinds, aloof from theoretical hair-splitting. The nature of the response to this demand submitted on behalf of an unlimited number of sympathizers will be able to prove the hardness of our will and authenticity of our decision. Can't wait. We've become skeptical of many of the revolutionary strategists who immediately predicted the German Revolution. Truth, the objective preconditions for it are indeed present in this period of increasingly clear economic crisis. But it lacks more subjective preconditions. Hunger alone is not sufficient. Today, there is no dynamic force in Germany is acting as an engine of revolution. That must, as bitter as it is, be recognized. Some will be discouraged, and some will go astray. They do not matter. In Germany today, it is up to the few thousand people who can wait, who, because they are aglow with the myth of Germany, can prepare themselves for the day that the steadily emerging order of nation is clearly visible, hoisting the banner of internal Germany was rolled up by their fathers in the forming columns of the German National Communist Camp of Revolution. They call to us. These pages apply to them. They belong to us, and we certain they will find a way to find us. Okay, thank you.